how to draw fur texture for beginners. That's what I'm going to teach you in today's video. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Michelle. On this channel, you'll find all things watercolor, drawing tutorials, a little bit of mixed media, even some business and motivation for artists too. Please do consider subscribing. It's free. It really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. If you click the bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make at least one free video a week here on YouTube on a Thursday with extra content for Patreon subscribers. So today I'm going to teach you how to get a realistic fur texture so that you can draw your animals with more confidence and know that they look more realistic. The main mistake that beginners make when they're drawing fur, and you may have made these mistakes if you're not trained in drawing, if you've just picked up pencils, you're just having a go. The main mistakes that beginners make are not blending and not layering enough. So I'm going to go through those things today. I'm going to go through the materials that you need. We're going to look at the three main elements of getting proper fur texture. That's pencil stroke, blending, and embossing. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to go through all of those things, put them all together in order to make some fantastic fur texture. I guarantee if you haven't been getting the results that you want, this video is going to make it so much easier and quicker for you. So let's get started. So first of all, we're going to look at materials. Now you don't need any special brands or anything like that, but we do need to just have a quick look at things like paper, because if you're using the wrong paper, you're not going to get the right results. I'm also going to be showing you a selection of blending and embossing tools. Now don't worry, it doesn't mean you have to go out and buy anything, because I'm going to give you some alternatives that you already own, that you already have in your house, so there's no need to buy anything special. I'm just going to be showing you some branded tools in case that's an option, something you want to pick up in the future. We're going to go very quickly through everything you need, and it doesn't just apply to this tutorial. This is the stuff that you need for any drawing or sketching that you would like to do. So let's talk about paper. I'm using today a cartridge paper by Frisk. I'll put the details up on the screen. Now, I know some of you in America are not familiar with the term cartridge paper. It can cause a bit of confusion. It's just in the UK the way that we describe a good quality sketch paper. So we're not talking about something thin like a printer paper, but neither are we talking something thick and textured like a watercolor paper. I'm just talking about any good quality sketching paper. The surface will appear smooth, but it does have a tooth on it, which means it's able to grip the pencil. If you buy a really cheap sketch pad and it's got very shiny pages, beware of that, because you'll never get any strong dark marks. It just doesn't have that very tiny texture to the surface that will help to grab the pencil. So if I make some shading here, you'll be able to see that surface texture. I'm going to show you later on how we can smooth that out, but it's really important that your paper has that texture, because as I said, otherwise you won't be able to get marks that are dark enough to get a good effect. I do not suggest sketching on watercolor paper. It's too textured. If you do need to do something on watercolor paper because you're going to be doing some kind of mixed media thing later on, in other words, you're going to be wetting your paper at some stage, then you can use something called hot press watercolor paper, which will give you a very similar effect as sketching paper. It's more expensive, so there's no need to do that unless you're going to be wetting your paper at some stage because you're putting something else on it. Also consider the drawing board you're using. I'm on a wooden board today, but it's a fairly smooth one. If you're using a board that's really incredibly textured, you may want to put a few sheets of paper underneath, and that'll stop you accidentally getting the impression of the drawing board texture showing up when you shade. Let's talk about pencils. So you're going to need two types of pencil. I've got a soft pencil and a hard pencil. So this pencil is an HB. You may have a pencil that's got F or H on it, or any of the numbered H's. These will give you a fine, detailed mark. It's great for doing tiny hairs, but it'll never be as dark or as soft or as easy to blend as a soft pencil, so we need one of those too. This one here I've got is a 5B. You could use anything really all the way from 2B up to 8 or 9B, depending on your manufacturer. And this one gives softer, darker, broader strokes that are both easier to erase but also easier to smudge. That's going to be very important to us later on. I've got a couple of erasers here. I've got this one here. I'll be honest with you, I didn't buy it. I don't even know where it came from. I used to teach a lot of art classes and things would appear and disappear as everybody's stuff got mixed up, and somewhere along the way I acquired this. It's not bad. I've also got this putty eraser that I use more for when I'm watercolor painting. This one can lift out fairly soft highlights. This one can lift out firmer highlights, like so. If you do a lot of pencil drawing, a lot of realistic pencil drawing, I do suggest that you invest in one of those erasers that looks like a mechanical pencil. You can get battery operated ones or just ones that you use by hand. If like me, you get freaked out by things that make your hands shake, but you really can get some very, very fine lifting out and some very fine details with those. I don't tend to use them because most of the drawing I do is for painting. But as I said, if you want to do lots of really fine detailed graphite drawings, then I really would invest in one of those. You'll find it a great help. Let's talk about pencil sharpeners. You can of course use a knife like this. If you do use a knife, you want to be angling it downwards and away from you as you shave along like this. A knife like this can enable you to get a longer lead than you would otherwise get. You can also get mechanical sharpeners that are designed to give a long lead on a pencil. I don't worry too much about what sort of sharpener I have. My favourite by far is this one here, which is one of these turn handle Helix desk sharpeners. I just love it because it's so reliable and always gives a good point. It's really important to control the point of your pencils. You can also, if you find that again you're doing a lot of detailed work and you need to keep bringing back the point on your pencil, you can also use some fine sandpaper or glass paper, which is going to help you to just redefine the point on your pencil without losing a load of the wood each time. It's really important to control what sort of point you have on your pencil. Remember that if you have a pencil that's just been sharpened, you're going to get much finer, more delicate lines, but you may actually want to have a pencil that's a little bit blunter from time to time if you're looking at wider, softer marks. So neither is right or wrong, but you want to consider controlling the point of your pencil depending on the type of marks that you would like to make. Let's look now at blending tools. Blending is so important. I often see beginner artists who are starting out with either pencils or colored pencils, and their work can look a little bit scruffy and undefined. And the main reason is that no one has told them about blending tools. They're such a game changer. So let's look at the options. Let me make some shading on the paper first of all so I can show you how they work. So this is one of my favorite types of blending tool. This is a torchon. They're also used for things like soft pastels, and you can blend in a quite precise manner and you can resharpen the point if you need to. The reason I like these is they're not too hard on the paper and they don't pick up too much of the pencil. They come, as you see, in different sizes. They're made from compressed paper and they really are a great thing to own. Here I have a Derwent blending tool. This is firmer. You sharpen this just like a pencil and you can use this to blend as well. Now, this is fantastic and you see that it can really blend those areas together without going too dark. I don't tend to use this one as much for graphite pencil, however. I use this for coloured pencils. And the reason is that coloured pencils are harder to blend than graphite pencils. And there's a danger with a hard blending tool like this that you end up burnishing the paper. If you burnish the paper, in other words, if you flatten the grain and make it too shiny, you won't be able to lay any more pencil on top because that tiny surface texture that we talked about earlier is no longer there to grab the pencil. So if you do use a tool like this, just use a light touch and be a little bit careful. Next up, we've got some blending tools that you may already have in your house. This is one of the firmer synthetic brushes such as you might use for acrylic painting, and we can get some lovely, lovely soft effects with this. So this is a great tool to use. Finally, two other things we have a Q-tip or a cotton bud. Again, this is great for blending. But do you see how it's lifted off more pencil than the blending tools that we used here? This is the only downside with this type of tool. Finally, we have a cosmetic tissue. You want to wrap it around your finger like this. Again, this can give some beautiful, beautiful soft blended areas. But just like the cotton bud or the Q-tip, it will lift off quite a lot of pencil. But these last three, the brush, the Q-tip and the cosmetic tissue, are certainly perfectly usable if you don't have any professional tools to hand. And even if you do, they really can give some great effects. Next, let's look at embossing tools. I've got a couple of different types here. You'll notice the point is hard, but it has a little ball on the end. And this just ensures that it won't tear or cut your paper. This tool has different ends for different sizes. This one here is the same sort of thing. It's just a bit more fun because you can click in and out, just like those ballpoint pens you had at school that changed the colour. This one will change the size of the embossing point. Now, before I show you what they do, the first one that you may have is a set of nail art tools, or you can pick them up very, very cheaply on Amazon or at your local pound or dollar store. They literally have tips exactly the same as this because they're used for dotting things onto nails. No, I don't do my own nails. A nice lady called Sophie does them for me. Another option is to use a ballpoint pen that has run out of ink. That makes a fantastic embossing tool. And lastly, if you don't have any of those, then just use a hard pencil like this. and you want to put a little bit of tracing paper or thin printer paper on top so that you're using it to make a dent in the paper, but you're not actually laying any graphite pencil down. So after all of this, what do they actually do? Well, an embossing tool has a different effect for different mediums. In watercolor, it's used to make little dark lines. I have other videos that will show you how to do that. But with pencil, what it'll do is make white lines. So when you emboss, basically what you're doing is making a dent in the paper. So in the case of watercolor paint, that dent will attract pigment and you'll get a dark line. But the opposite happens with pencil, where your pencil will skip over the top of the line. Now I've done these quite large and quite blunt, just so that you see them clearly on camera, but I think you can already see the potential for making white lines, either for fur, botanicals, anything else. Do remember that it's not foolproof. You know, if you take your pencil and draw on top, you can actually take the pencil back into these lines. So the most effective thing is to sketch, if you can, crossways to where you have embossed, in order that you keep the majority of these little lines white. And our embossing tool doesn't just have to preserve white paper. It can also be used to reserve areas that we've previously sketched on. So let's go back to this area here where we blended. I'll use the larger end of the embossing tool. What should happen now is I should reserve this mid-tone, and then when I go across with my darker shading, we have something much more subtle going on. We'll be using these techniques later on when we create our fur texture. At this point in the video, could I just pop in and ask you please to click the like button if you're enjoying this video, if you're getting some value from it. A huge amount of people who watch me, in fact who watch all channels on YouTube, are not subscribed. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and it doesn't cost you a penny. If you could like, share, subscribe, or leave me a comment, it tells YouTube that this is a great video. At the moment, I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. I'm over 90,000, which is absolutely astonishing. I'm incredibly grateful to all of you who watch me and support me here on YouTube. So first of all, we're going to look at pencil strokes. This is really, really important. Just the direction that you draw in can make a huge difference. I'm also going to be explaining a little bit about the structure of animal fur. So let's talk about the direction of pencil stroke. Now here, I'm going to take some strokes upwards. And can you see what happens? As I lift my pencil off of the paper, the stroke gets finer and narrower, and you can see already it's emulating a human or animal hair, which, unless they've been cut, do have a fine tip like this. And look what happens if I go the other way. So I'm coming down now. I'm ending up with much blunter lines. So when you're drawing fur, you don't want to be going sort of up and down like this, because you just end up getting very blunt marks. The other thing to note about animal fur, and I'm certainly not an expert in biology, but just from observation, I've noticed that there's underneath fur that can be very soft. It's usually very uniform in colour. And then there are the coarser, larger hairs on the outside of the coat. Now, of course, every animal is completely different, so you'll need to observe. But one thing about hair and fur is that it tends to grow in clumps. So you want to be sort of looking for those clumps, and you want to be going in the direction that the fur is growing. So always root to tip. And you may find that there are sort of sections where you have fur growing in one direction and then another direction. So one of the first things you want to look at with your animal is the direction that the fur is growing in any particular area. And this is why pencil direction and pencil stroke is so important. And this is just one of the elements that we'll be using to build up our fur. Let's move on to embossing and embossing tools. Now, this is one of the biggest kept secrets. Embossing tools don't only have to be used for pencil drawing. They can be used for watercolor painting, although they have a completely different effect in that case. If you haven't used embossing tools before for pencil work, it's an absolute game changer. You're going to be astonished at the effects that you can get. So we talked about pencil stroke direction. We need to do the same with the embossing tool. So in other words, we need to also be taking the embossing tool, if we're using it, in the direction that the hair is growing. Of course, you may be using this to get something like whiskers, in which case they may cut across the face. In other words, they may go contrary to the direction that the fur is growing in. But that's fine because you're still getting the direction the whisker is growing in. You can also adjust the point of your embossing tool from fine to get tiny hairs, right up to thicker to get things like whiskers and those funny little eyebrow hairs that cats have. And then you'll see, as we shade on top, If you compare this one to the initial ones I showed you when I was just showing you how to use the embossing tool, we're already getting a much more natural effect because we're taking advantage of that idea of the fur both clumping and growing in a certain direction. Now let's look at blending after pencil stroke. This is probably the biggest mistake that I see, both in graphite pencil work but also in coloured pencils, and that's not blending, not taking advantage of blending tools and blending techniques. Because within any subject that you look at, there are going to be parts that have rough texture, parts that have smooth texture, parts that are velvety soft, and you simply can't achieve these effects with drawing alone. You need to be blending. If you ever wanted to get those really soft, fluffy animals, this is going to give you the techniques that you need. So let's look at blending within this fur application. And there may be areas on your animal where there isn't really any visible fur texture. Everything is quite soft. You may even have the very edge of the animal where there's a real fluffiness to it. You can also use the blending tools for any area where you've worked in multiple layers and you just feel like they need to be a little bit softened. So there comes a point in an animal drawing sometimes where it looks good, but it's almost gone into hyper realism and you can see too many individual hairs. And then you want to sort of step back from it and consider any areas that really do need to be softened. And of course, you can layer and blend multiple times with different types of tools to get the effects you want. Maybe going in near eyes and things like that where you don't want to smudge across the eyeball with a fine point torchon like this one, or a little brush. Now we looked at using embossing tools for making lighter highlights. There's something else that's very important when making fur, and that's using an eraser to lift out soft highlights. So what we're going to do now is take everything we've learned, put it together, add in some lifting out techniques using the eraser, and we're going to fully create a piece of really realistic, lovely looking fur. So let's put all those things together now and make some fur texture. Do bear in mind that it's going to vary from animal to animal. So you need to look at your own individual animal. The first thing I like to do is see if there are any white hairs showing, because if there are white hairs showing, then I like to go in right at the beginning with an embossing tool. Do bear in mind that once you've compressed your paper like this, you're not really going to get rid of these marks again. So make sure that your drawing is correct. In other words, make sure that everything's in the right place, because you're not going to be able to move these later and erase a whole area of your drawing. So that's just something to consider. And with any drawing, it's really important that you get the layout right to start with. You should never be putting detail on any drawing or painting if you're not 100% certain that you've got everything in the right place. I've got lots of videos in my drawing tips playlist that will help you to do that. So I like to start off with the embossing tool. I realize you can't see anything at this moment. And then I'm going to just lay down an area of shading like this. I'm going a little bit here in the opposite direction, as I said, so that we don't accidentally put too much graphite into those areas. From here, I'll look at smudging. And I'm going to start with the cosmetic tissue, simply because it doesn't burnish the paper too much. It gives me the opportunity to lay more graphite on top. I'm then going to start looking at anywhere that we have more visible individual hairs. Being careful not to go over all of those initial embossed lines. I may have areas where the fur is very dark and we can't see any visible texture, so I can put those in as well. And we'll need to blend these two. Maybe there are areas where I see more darks. And then I'll take my torchon and blend. If everything's starting to look how I think it should look, but perhaps there are some lighter areas where we have highlights and perhaps it's gone a bit too dark, then I'll take a little bit of a firmer eraser and I can lift out some highlights. As I said, all the time observing and looking at how your particular animal looks. Again, going in and blending any areas. I can take a little bit more pencil in anywhere where the eraser has just gone a little bit too hard. Apologies at this point if you can hear rain. It's hammering down outside here in the UK. It was sunny 5 minutes ago, but that's why we're always talking about the weather. And now, lastly, I've gone onto my hard pencil. And this is going to give me any really hard, fine hairs that I can see on the top of the coat. And of course, if you feel that the edge here has come out too far, you can lift out some of that smudging, but do be careful not to leave too much hardness there. Just take some kind of blending tool and soften. And here we have it. Of course, it will vary from animal to animal. Observation is key. But look at this beautiful, soft, natural fur texture that we have created. So recently on this channel, drawing videos have been very popular. To be honest, I started the channel to teach watercolour painting. I'm astonished how many of you are interested in drawing. So do let me know in the comments if there are any other problems that you have with drawing. And don't forget to check out my drawing playlist. I have a whole playlist full of drawing videos. At the end of this video, I'll link to one of my most popular ones, because getting a beautiful fur texture is not going to help you if you overall have trouble drawing the animal. So I've got lots of videos about proportion and scale. And before you leave this video, don't forget to check out the video description. I have some free downloadable PDFs down there that you can grab for no money whatsoever. I've even got a free watercolour painting course that you can take. If you also paint in watercolours, you're wondering how to get fur texture in watercolour, I have a video about that too. I believe it's in my watercolour tips and techniques playlist. I'm actually in the process of reorganizing all my playlists so that everything's in the right place, because when I started out, I made the mistake that some YouTubers make of putting things in multiple playlists, because you can do that. But as a viewer on YouTube myself, I find it's really irritating if you go into another playlist because you're checking out all the videos and you find a video that you've already watched. So I'm going to be going through this year and making sure that each video is only in one playlist. And whilst you're already here watching me on YouTube, you can watch my 20 fast drawing tips video right now.